Would you ask Mr. Ledsome to come back in, please?
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Ledsome, you ready to carry on?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, Mr.
Yes. Mr. Ledsome, can we go next, please, to CLG 1008060? This is an email from Brian Martin to Richard Harrell, a copy to you.
I'm sorry, Chair, just whilst we're waiting for the documents to be drawn up, I just wondered if I could have the opportunity just to comment a little further on the exchange I had with Council before lunch about my recollection of what was covered in one of those work stream reports. I've had a look at my witness statement, and I think what I meant was the report that related to space separation, which was separation between buildings on external fire spread. And I think, therefore, there was some discussion about for what I called modern methods of construction, but in that context, not in the context of external fire spread up buildings. So I really wanted to have the opportunity to ensure that there was I didn't give any misleading impression.
No,
thank you.
Thank you very much. If necessary, Mr. Millett can follow that up.
Of course.
When it suits him.
Thank you. That's a very helpful clarification, Mr. Ledsome. I'm grateful to you. Thank you. Now, what I'd like to go to, please, is not this. It's CLG 1008060. This is an email from Brian Martin to Richard Harrell, copied to you 16th of March 2016, some 4 months after the David Amos letter. And it says this: Richard, I mentioned at our HOB's meeting, HOB, head of
branches meeting, so that would be the meeting that Mr. Harrell would have with his technical team.
Right, thank you. I mentioned at our HOB's meeting the ongoing correspondence with Sir David Amos, chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Fire Safety and Rescue Group. James Wharton met with the group on 26th November. Since then, Sir David has written to JW 3 times. Essentially, they want to see a review of ADB and aren't very happy about how long they are having to wait. We had a similar run of increasingly tetchy correspondence from Sir David with Stephen Williams. When the most recent letter came in, JW's private office rang me to ask what the hold-up was. I explained that a submission was imminent. JW has signed the reply to Sir David. The last line I used was, I am not yet in a position to set out our plans for building regulations. It is important to recognise that fire safety is just one element of the regulations and the building control system. There are other pressures on building regulations, and I think it is best to consider them all in the round. I've attached all the correspondence, numbered in chronological order, if you want the gory detail. I assume we stick with this line until we go public. Now, first, from your recollection, was James Wharton frustrated with a hold-up on your part?
Forgive me, the most recent letter from Sir David, would that have been sort of early February? I'm just trying to think of the timeline of the letters from the APPG and therefore at what point we were in terms of advice to Minister Wharton.
Well, the most recent letter that we can find is the... well, I'm sorry. Do you know what this is talking about? Martin, let me try the question again.
Sorry.
Let me try the question again, because it was a simple question. Let me try it again. Was James Wharton frustrated with a hold-up on your part in March 2016?
So, I didn't have that feedback. I know that a few weeks previously, in terms of substantial submissions to Minister Wharton, there were the submissions in the autumn 2015, and then, as you all know, the next substantive submission, for reasons we've discussed, was not until the 1st of April 2016, so I accept that that's quite a period of time. We did keep in touch with Minister Wharton's office about what was happening, and I asked Mr. Harrell specifically to update his office in early 2016, so that we were ensuring he was the minister was up to speed. So I'm presuming that what this is that the letter from Sir David, and I think there was one in early February, so maybe that is what is being referred to here, would have referred again to what the minister said about the ADB review, and my recollection is that the response which the minister sent, which we looked at just before lunch, i.e. at the end of 2015, made reference to an early announcement or an announcement in the new year or something to that effect. So I think it's perfectly understandable that the minister is saying, well, I was given advice that led me to say that to Sir David, so what's been happening, please? And that's what I think that this exchange would reflect.
Thank you. Now let's just, you mentioned a February 2016 letter.
Yes.
I haven't shown you that, but in fairness, perhaps we should look at it.
Okay.
Let's try it anyway, see how we go. CLG 3019334. And it's a letter from David Amos, again, to James Wharton, 22nd of February 2016. And if you look at the first line, there's a reference to an undated letter of the 15th of February, referring to a letter of the 1st of February. The second letter refers to an earlier letter of the 6th of January. And at the foot of the page, it says that the 6th of January letter said that you hope to set out the government's intentions regarding building regulations in the new year, and we are already well into February. Some further clarification very soon would be extremely helpful. Given the many assurances given by former ministers and secretaries of state in this regard. So that's...
Okay.
Is that the letter you were...
That was the exchange I was thinking about.
Right. Does that help? Now, let's then go back to my question, and I wonder if you could answer it as shortly as you can. Was James Wharton frustrated with the hold-up on your part?
Well, I was not told that in those terms, in using the words like frustration. I'm trying to recall whether there was any further email exchanges with his private office after the exchange, which I mentioned in my previous answer. I can't recall that.
Can we go back then to the email 1000860 and look and see what Mr. Martin is saying there? He repeatedly talks about lines to use. Do you agree that the department was, as it were, handling Sir David and the APPG rather than telling Sir David in plain terms what was actually happening?
Well, I think the sentences in inverted commas, which I am presuming are verbatim or near enough verbatim from the minister's reply, set out where we were the position.
It's a line, though, is what I'm really putting to you. This is a position. And does that tell us that rather than telling him straight up what was going on in the department, you were giving him a position, a line?
Well, the line is saying where we were, where the position was, that he was not in a position to set out plans because, regrettably, we had not at that point in time been able to get the discussion document to him. So I think that is a reflection of a fair reflection of what the position was. So I'm not quite sure I completely follow what you're saying about a line as opposed to a description of where things were.
Well, let me try it. Let me see if I can get it this way. The first sentence of the line he uses is, I'm not yet in a position to set out our plans. Now, that's a simple negative statement, yes?
Correct.
Yes. And it was true.
Yes.
Yes. And then you get something else. You get a lesson. It is important to recognise that fire safety is just one element of the regulations and the building control system. You're not telling him what's happened, you're giving him a piece of teaching about the importance of fire safety as only one of a number of elements of regulation.
Well, I think that if the reply had finished after the first sentence, then I would imagine Sir David would have said, well, why? and the subsequent words explain why that there was a broader piece of work underway, as we've discussed, and that the minister considered that it was best to look at these in the round, and therefore that is why he was not yet in a position to announce plans. So I think that's just a further helpful explanation of why he had not been able to make the announcement.
Would it be fair to read that second sentence as imparting the line to Sir David that fire safety was not a top priority, but one element only, or as he says, just one element of the regulations and the building control system?
What that is saying is that we are conducting a review overall that includes fire safety within it. I don't think there's any inference about something being higher priority than something else, or that something being lower priority than something else. I don't see that at all in this text.
You really don't?
No.
I mean, well, how would you read the words, or how did you read the words at the time? It's important to recognise that fire safety is just one element of the regulations.
Well, that's a statement of fact.
Yes, but it does tend to suggest that it's not the most important.
Well,
doesn't it?
Well, I have to say, I think I would consider all of the elements of the building regulations of equal importance. I mean, that is the way the building regulations are constructed.
Well, they're not all.
There is no hierarchy that says that, for example, Part B is more important than, say, Part A.
Well, Part A is about structure, and one can see why you picked that as an example.
Yes.
But not all the building regulations or the approved documents are about life safety, are they?
No.
No.
But I think Regulation 4 something of the building regulations sets out that in consideration of whether work complies with the building regulations, equal consideration should be given to all relevant element of those regulations. So therefore, that does not establish a hierarchy that says this regulation, this functional requirement is more important than that functional requirement. So I don't think that is a statement of fact.
The APPG group, I think you would agree with me this much, Mr. Ledsome, were unhappy about how long the review of ADB was taking.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Was that not an entirely legitimate concern, given that this is now March 2016, some 3 years after the Lakenal coroner's recommendations and some 8 years, almost 8 years after the fire itself?
A very legitimate issue for them to be concerned about.
Now, the line being suggested here was that ministers were not yet in a position to set out plans for building regulations, as is said, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Why was that?
Because, as I explained before lunch, once Minister Wharton had signed off the discussion document, it would need to have been agreed with the Secretary of State, and it would then have needed collective clearance. Only at that point would the government or Minister Wharton or whoever be in a position to make a public statement. That is the way the process of collective discussion and consideration of policy works. Therefore, we are not in a position at this point in time, and the Minister is not in a position at this point in time, to make a commitment to a policy which has not been collectively agreed, or an approach which has not been collectively agreed in terms of the detail of plans for building regulations. That reflects that position.
I understand, and that answer, I think, reflects a lot of the evidence you've already given.
Indeed.
Over the years we've seen up to this point. My question is, why not tell Sir David Amess exactly what you've just told us?
Well, there is always an element of caution in government in terms, even with a backbencher as well regarded of seniority and experience as Sir David, to expose the inner workings of government, where exactly things are in a process. We would always use a more general formulation of this nature if we were in a position where work was underway, but we were not in a position to set out a detailed set of plans or proposals. it is not unusual in any policy scenario for this sort of formulation to be used where a department is not yet in a position to make a public announcement but is being asked about progress.
Why didn't you tell him that no proposals had yet been put before the minister,
Well,
or any minister?
we had put proposals to Minister Wharton in the first instance in October 2015. They needed further development, clearly, following his feedback on that submission and the meeting that we had with him. So I don't accept that no plans. I would accept final plans.
Final proposals, yes.
Had not been put because that was the purpose of the April submission.
Why not tell him that?
Well, we could have said that. We didn't say that. We could have said that.
Was that because you were giving him a line, spinning him along?
No, I do not accept that. I think this is a short, concise, yes, response to the inquiry from Sir David as to where things were, and I think that is how I read that reply, this reply, and I regard that as a perfectly proper response to the inquiry suggestion the Minister would make to the inquiry from Sir David at this point.
Now, Sir David's concern, as we've seen, and we will continue to see in a moment, was about fire safety because it was about life safety. The second sentence there tends to suggest, doesn't it, that, as it says, fire safety is just one element of the regulations. Building on the evidence you've just given on that sentence, was it the case that the department regarded fire safety as of equal importance and not more importance than other elements of the building regulations? For example, Part E, sound.
No, I mean, in my previous answer, I was referring to the position as to how the law sets out that, in terms of considering compliance, all parts of the functional requirements are to be treated equally. In relation to work that we were undertaking, then clearly, because of its importance per se, clearly in terms of the commitment which had been given by Lord Pickles, if there was a choice between, well, do we do work on noise before work on fire safety, the answer would have been, we were never asked that question. If we were, my recommendation very strongly would be no, we need to deal with the fire safety work before we look at, for example, noise, even though we knew that there were quite a number of issues with that particular, or the guidance on that particular part of the building regulations.
Right. Well, if that was the thinking of the department, it's completely contrary to what Mr. Martin sets out in that second sentence here, in the line he used to Sir David.
No.
Why not?
Because what Mr. Martin is referring to is a programme of work which covers all of the building regulations, be it Part B, through all of the things that we've discussed when we have looked at the various drafts of the discussion document. It does not imply at all that we are treating other parts of the building regulations as higher priority in that programme of work, as higher priority than fire safety, and we looked at that in some of the earlier evidence. So I do not accept that is. It's not an inference I would draw from that sentence, and it is certainly not an implication that we wanted to put over in that sentence.
Now, we already covered the fact that on the 17th of July 2016, Gavin Barwell was appointed minister.
Yes.
When you briefed him, did you give him any background as to the previous correspondence with the APPG?
Not in that first briefing, no. I don't think that would have been mentioned.
He says in his witness statement, I don't think I need to show it to you, it's paragraph 27 at page 11, that he wasn't aware that the chain of correspondence between ministers and the APPG had been going on for a period of years. Can you account for that?
If you're able to tell me at what point or what point in the chronology he made that statement, then he clearly would have. We did not discuss it in the early briefing. So no, we did not discuss it. It did not come up at that meeting.
No.
No.
Yes,
I agree.
And why is that?
Well, because we had a lot to cover, and in my view, there would have been, we would have fully expected, as indeed they did, of course, that the APPG would correspond with Lord Barwell, which they did, and at that point that would enable us to then explain to Lord Barwell the various sequence of events and the correspondence that his previous ministers had had with the APPG. That would have been an opportunity to explain the background.
So what, as and when the next missive came in?
As and when the APPG next wrote to Minister Lord Barwell.
Explain the thinking. Why, given the history, and some years of correspondence now, given the delay, why not tell Gavin Barwell that one of the things that's going to be coming across his desk pretty soon, he could count on it, was another letter from David Amis on this subject?
We would have had a lot to go through with Lord Barwell in a limited amount of time. And that purpose of that first meeting was to actually help Lord Barwell, Minister Barwell, actually understand the building regulations system. So it was very much focused on that discussion with a brief reference to some of the big issues coming or likely to be coming across his desk, which we've discussed. Obviously the engagement of the APPG is important, but at that point in time, it would not have been a meeting where, for example, we would have said, oh, well, the APPG may write to you, and there may be some other people who may write to you, you may go and need to visit. We suggest or recommend that you speak to X, Y, or Z. It was not that kind of meeting. So as I say, we fully expected that the APPG would write. I can't remember exactly when they did, in summer 2016, and I would have expected if that had not happened, then as we developed the proposals for the discussion document with Lord Barwell, that would have been a good opportunity if there had been no correspondence from the APPG at that point to say a key stakeholder in engagement on this process will be with the APPG, and if Sir David Amis does not approach you himself about it, you may wish to consider speaking to him or briefing him on the proposals. So that, I think, would have been what would have happened if the APPG had not written to Lord Barwell when they did.
CLG 30193998, please. This is a letter from Sir David Amis, APPG. In fact, it comes from him, I say personally, but in his capacity as MP for Southend West. 17th of October 2016. Dear Mr. Barwell, Sir David sent you the enclosed letter on 12th September, but we do not seem to have received a response. And this comes from his office. The next page, page 2, is the letter sent on the 12th of September 2016. If we just go to that. And that says, Dear Gavin, this is to Gavin Barwell. There's some congratulations in the first paragraph. Second paragraph. The previous post holder with the building regulations responsibility was James Wharton MP, who met with the group as long ago as 26th of November 2015, when he promised to make an announcement shortly, quotes unquotes, about the review of approved document B guidance fire safety to the regulations, where a great deal of preparatory work had already been done, but with some serious outstanding issues still needing to be addressed. Regrettably, we have yet to receive any announcement on this, which is of such importance to fire and construction sectors. I recall you did speak at a parliamentary fire seminar in Westminster following the riots in Croydon in 2013, so you already have an understanding of the need for effective fire safety in the built environment, with increased use of modern materials and methods of construction. And it goes on over the page and reminds the Minister of the lunch, and then no minutes, but exchange of thoughts. And then in the next paragraph, meanwhile, I'm attaching a copy of my last letter to James dated 20th of June 2016 with enclosures also attached, to which I have yet to receive a response or acknowledgement. Now, it may not have been the case that that letter got through. Let's then look at the response to it, please, at CLG 0008717. This is dated, and this is a draft, I think, dated the 14th of November 2016. And right, let me try the reference again. CLG 1008717. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Now, this is, in fact, not the draft, but the version that went to him, the final version. And I think it was drafted by Brian Martin. And we know that because he sends it to you on the 17th of November after it has gone.
Yeah.
Let's just look at the letter first, and then we'll look at the email. Dear David, thank you for your letter of 17th of October. I'm sorry your original letter of 12th September does not appear to have arrived in this office. With respect to your concerns relating to fire safety aspects of building regulations, my department has been looking at a range of issues relating to the regulations, many of which are interrelated, and our intention is to make a statement in due course. In your original letter, you kindly offered to meet over lunch to discuss the issues that you've raised. I know you've had a similar meeting with my predecessor, and the views of your group are being given proper consideration. As such, I think it would be better and more constructive to wait until after this statement has been made so that our conversation can be in context. And then there's something about the 20th of June letter. Now that's what went out. You get sent this a few days later. Can we look at CLG 000193882, please? CLG 30193882. Yes. Here is Brian Martin's email to you and Richard Harrell, 17th of November 2016. Bob, Richard, Gavin Barwell has now signed this MSU. I based the reply on the PQs we had dealt with. I thought I'd bring it to your attention as the APPG seemed to be getting increasingly irritated at the delay in getting on with work on ADB. The important paragraphs are below, and he sets those out.
Yeah.
And you've seen those already.
Yeah.
Did you reply to this email?
I can't recall.
Did you agree that the APPG were justified in their irritation that nothing had changed by this time?
Well, clearly I'm sorry.
By this time, November 2016.
Clearly, they were entitled to make that point and make it vigorously, as in Sir David's letters.
Yes. Did you take that opportunity to query the delay, the ever-shifting timetable, and get to the bottom of it at this point?
The timetable for the review and the work was underway. Of course, I was intimately involved working with Richard Harrell and Brian Martin on the development of the discussion document. So I was aware of what the APPG's concern was.
If we go back to the letter that we've just looked at, that went out to Sir David from Gavin Barwell, CLG 1008717, did you approve this letter?
I cannot recall if I approved it. I'm afraid I cannot recall.
Whether you did or you didn't.
Whether I did or I didn't.
Whether you did or you didn't. Wasn't it an exercise in deflection and delay?
It was an exercise in explaining to Sir David that we were not yet in a position to make an announcement as he had been pressing. And we, as per the previous discussion, with a brief explanation as to why that was the case, as it's set out in the second paragraph.
Well, you see, Sir David has offered a lunch meeting to discuss the issues. The Minister goes back and essentially says, no, wait until I've made a statement. Now, isn't that an exercise in deflection and delay?
That is an exercise in saying to Sir David that a fuller discussion would be constructive, with the APPG would be constructive once there is something substantive to talk to the APPG about, because there would have been an announcement in the public domain, which would then give a focus for Minister Barwell to explain the government's thinking on the relevant issues and to have a discussion with the APPG about those. That is why there was the suggestion in Lord Barwell's letter that that a meeting might be held once the statement had been made.
When was it going to be made?
Well, at that point in time, I can't remember the exact sequence. We were still working on the basis of trying to get the letter out, the discussion document out as rapidly as possible. I'm not sure at that point whether we were yet in a position to be absolutely certain when that would be.
So what did Gavin Barwell mean? Obviously you're not him, but Brian Martin drafted this. What did your department mean in due course at the end of the second paragraph there?
Well, at this point in time, because of things were very fluid, we were not in a position to advise Minister Barwell to provide a definitive date to Sir David Amess about when that discussion document would be published.
So I repeat the question. Was it not, therefore, an exercise in deflection and delay?
It was an exercise in putting in a holding reply, because we were not in a position to provide a precise date as to when the discussion document might be issued, and it would have been wrong to say it will happen on date X, because we were not in a position to make that decision.
Now, before Gavin Barwell sent this letter, did he receive from you, or to your knowledge from Brian Martin, a briefing on the background, a full and candid briefing on the background, including the full run of correspondence with the APPG back to 2013?
I don't recall if that was provided. I think I probably would have been aware of it if it had.
Yeah. Can we take it?
So I think the answer would be there would not have been a full brief.
Why is that?
I think at this point in time, we were looking to provide the response to the specific letter, and that at such a time as the Minister Barwell met with Sir David and the APPG, that would have been the occasion to give Minister Barwell a full briefing on the various exchanges that his predecessors had had with the APPG.
Can we go to your witness statement, please, at page 61, and look at paragraph 237 together? And you say there, and this is in response to the inquiry's questions about concerns raised by the APPG, you say in the second and third lines this: in general, my recollection is that I would have discussed letters with my team members and agreed the general approach. Now, clearly, that's a very generic and general answer, and nothing wrong with that. But my question is, well, what was the general approach that you agreed?
So the APPG really focused on two issues, to my recollection, in their correspondence. Obviously, they raised concerns about a variety of technical issues, but at the heart of it, what they were seeking was pushing, understandably and rightly so, for the review of ADB to be progressed, not least because that then, when it was in the public domain, would enable the APPG to make further representations, as no doubt they would have done. That was the first set of issues. The second set of issues were around sprinklers.
No, sorry, to be clear, because you're talking about them, I'm talking about you. Let's keep it simple.
Sorry.
What was your general approach? What was your
general I'm sorry. I thought that, so I interpret that as the general approach to how we responded to the to the letters. So, as I think I say in my next sentence, the way I would have approached this was I would have, if those letters raised new issues, then I would have hoped and expected that the desk officer, Mr. Martin or whoever, would have alerted me to them. If it was a if the letters were more about, well, where are things with ADB, or where are things on a policy where the government has an established position, then I would have expected in those circumstances that the general response that we had developed in answer to those questions would be used, which is the case in these responses that we have been looking at.
Do you accept that the approach that you took, your department took, in assisting the minister to respond to Sir David through these years, whoever the minister was essentially to ignore the prescient warnings about the dangers of failing to update approved document B?
I wouldn't accept that. We would have explained to the ministers about the process that we were engaged in terms of a review, and that we felt that review would be the opportunity to address issues raised by the APPG and indeed other stakeholders.
And that you stuck to a general approach of deflection and delay, sticking to the utmost generalities, and never gave the minister a proper, granular, detailed briefing about the APPG correspondence and the content of their concerns.
Well, that is the case. I think on looking back on it, perhaps, in some instances, we should have offered the minister the opportunity to make a more substantive response to some of the points raised by the APPG. I would accept that, but at this point in time, we very much focused on the issues around particularly the timing and the limitations on what we could say about the ADB review because of the uncertainties which attended that.
Can we go back to a document we saw earlier today, which was at CLG 3030840, page 7. This is the briefing note that Simon Ridley crafted for Helen McNamara, written immediately after the fire. And if you look at the last bullet point under the first main paragraph or chunk of text there, he says, our correspondence with the APPG is appalling, delayed, partial, and looks chaotic. Do you accept those criticisms?
I don't quite know what is meant by delayed. Clearly there were problems with some letters which regrettably, for whatever reason, didn't arrive, and there was a period when obviously there was, as we've seen, some follow-up from the APPG asking for responses. I think there was been genuine correspondence problems there. I've already accepted that perhaps in some instances we should have offered the Minister the opportunity to make a more substantive response on particular points above and beyond the general approach that were put in the letters. Again, obviously, I don't know exactly what Mr. Ridley saw when he reached this view.
Would you agree, looking at the correspondence we've looked at together, which is by no means all of it, otherwise we'd have been here for rather longer, that your department pursued a strategy of deflection and delay, always kicking the can down the road and taking advantage of the serial changes of minister?
I do not accept that.
Do you accept that there was an utter failure of engagement with the concerns that the APPG was raising?
I've accepted that with hindsight, we could have offered the Minister the opportunity to make a fuller response to specific comments made in the APPG letters.
Can we go to CLG 3019471, please? CLG 3019471. This is Lord Pickles' witness statement to the inquiry, and I'd like within it, please, to go to page 24, paragraph 82. He says this: I've subsequently been shown correspondence received by the department from the All-Party Parliamentary Fire and Rescue Safety Group, which was dealt with at the junior minister level. I did not see this correspondence at the time, or the responses the department sent. I'm disappointed to see that the convention of politeness in interministerial correspondence was not always adhered to. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would accept Lord Pickles' opinion on the way that the correspondence was dealt with, if that's what he felt, obviously he would have, he's obviously took a firm view, took a very clear view on the matter as expressed here.
Let's turn to a different topic altogether. I want to ask you about fire safety critical matters and some aspects of the approved document itself.
Okay.
Now, first, can we go to Brian Martin's witness statement, please? CLG 3019469, page 38, paragraph 113. Exactly halfway down the paragraph, you see there's a sentence that starts, "Here it is important," yes?
Yes.
Here it is important to recall that compliance with the functional requirements of the regulations is to be achieved by the person undertaking the construction, the design team, architect, builder, etc., and it is signed off by the relevant building control body. The department's role as set out above is a devolved one. It sets the regulations and administers the approved documents. How the industry secures compliance with the functional requirements is a matter for the industry, as my comments in this email exchange were intended to explain. Now, I don't think I need to show you the email exchange with Ipswich Borough Council, but that's the background. First, does what he says there accord with your own understanding of the department's role in relation to the building regulations and the approved documents?
Yes.
Do you consider that the department's role was, as he says, a devolved one?
Well, the way I would have phrased it is that the building regulation system is based on the devolution of responsibility for compliance to the person, the duty holder, and in terms of enforcement and compliance checking to either a local authority or an approved inspector. So that is the position, and that is what I think Mr. Martin is meaning and intending when he made that statement here.
Well, he's talking about the department's role. He says the department's role is a devolved one. We'll obviously ask him what he means by that.
Yeah.
But what did you understand by the department's role?
Well, I think I probably would have phrased it slightly differently. I would think I probably would have phrased it, the department operates in a devolved system.
Right.
Because the department's role as a devolved one implies that something is being devolved to the department. And I think what Mr. Martin probably meant was that in effect, the responsibilities had been devolved to, as I've said, building control. And obviously that is not the department's policy, that is what the Building Act provides.
Well, let me see if I can break it up a bit. Do you agree that the department's role and your role was to administer the approved documents?
In the sense of keeping them under review and updating them, yes.
Yes. And disseminating them.
And disseminating, of course, yes.
Did that involve giving consideration to the likely readership of the approved documents?
Yes, it would.
Yes. Did it include writing documents in a clear and understandable manner?
Well, we did our best to achieve that.
Yes. Did that involve achieving, or seeking to achieve at least, a settled understanding within the department as to the actual scope, meaning and application of the provisions of the guidance being produced?
Well, obviously we would have hoped that the guidance produced was sufficiently clear that that was the outcome.
And do you agree that it involved a preparedness, where required, to clarify or explain the scope or the meaning or the application of particular provisions of the guidance?
So that's why we would have a process of reviewing approved documents, yes.
Well, let's just break it up. First of all, was the department prepared to clarify or explain the scope and meaning and application of the provisions of the guidance if and when alerted to a need to do so?
We would have been prepared to address that, yes.
So if and when alerted to a lack of clarity in relation to any particular section or word, is it your evidence that the department would have been willing to clarify or explain?
We would have been willing to consider unnecessary clarification or explanation. I think I would say that.
Right. And was it your understanding that if the department had been asked for what it was that government intended by a particular word or phrase or provision, that it was the department's responsibility to say what that was in clear and unambiguous terms?
In broad terms, of course, if we're asked for a clarification, then we would seek to offer this. I'm being slightly cautious because it would not be our role to give a definitive interpretation of a functional requirement, because ultimately that would be a matter for a court. So we would be quite careful about how we phrased or responded to a request, for example, as presumably happened in this exchange, as to the interpretation to be placed upon particular regulatory provisions.
Well, let's just be a little bit more precise.
Yeah.
You referred in that answer to an interpretation of the regulation, the functional requirement.
Yes.
And I think your answer is the proper interpretation of that is a matter of law.
Yes.
Yes. I'm asking you about the approved documents,
Yes.
which are guidance.
Yes.
Was it the department's position that the meaning of a provision in the approved documents was also a matter of law?
Well, it would not be in the sense, obviously, of a this raises quite an interesting question, if I may, because of the legal status of the approved documents, and in particular how a court would treat issues around negative liability or tendency to negative liability, etc., as per Section 7 of the Building Act. So it may be that if there had been a disagreement between a building control body and a duty holder as to the extent to which they, in those circumstances, were complying with the approved document, and complying with the approved document was indeed the way in which the functional requirement was met, then that might have been a legal issue. But I think, in answer to your question, I'm sorry, I should have answered your question first. Yes, if there were concerns and issues that we felt could be clarified or needed to be clarified, then of course that would be something that we would consider, and we would consider that as part of reviews of the relevant approved document.
And that leads to a different question, which is, did you regard it, or was it regarded by the department as its role to answer a question about what the department, being the government for this purpose, intended by a particular word or provision?
I think that would have been, that's absolutely a legitimate question to be asked of us and for us to give consideration to, in terms of whether we felt a clarification was necessary, and if so, how best to do that.
So I think the answer to my question, is yes. You did regard it as the department's responsibility to answer a question in clear terms about what it was that the government intended in a particular word or provision in the approved document.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Now, were there any processes or mechanisms in place by which the department was able, without the need for a full formal review of the entire body of approved documents or the entire approved document within it which a provision sat, to clarify or amend particular words or provisions in the approved documents if there was a considered need to do so on an urgent basis?
There were mechanisms available to us.
And what were those?
We could write to building control bodies. We have, as you will know, an FAQ section on the department's website, so those would be two mechanisms, for example. Or we could work with industry or building control bodies or the sector in terms of guidance which they were providing.
Right.
So those are three examples.
And those would be reasonably easy and reasonably speedy?
They would be a lot speedier than reviewing in a day,
Indeed.
Yes.
I think we can agree with
Yes.
that. Now, I want to ask you about FAQs. It was the purpose of an FAQ. I mean, FAQ frequently asked question.
Yeah.
First, who within your team would be responsible for deciding on what matters should be included in or explained by an FAQ?
In the first instance, I would expect it would be the desk officer, the relevant desk officer for that part of the regulations.
Oh, right. Now, the desk officer for ADB after 2013 was who?
Well, that would have been Mr. Martin.
Okay, right. Yes. Let's look at an example of one. If we go to CLG 1603, please. Now, this is page 1, and it says approved document B, frequently asked questions, March 2016, yes?
Yes.
And if you go to the contents list on page 3, we can see that in March 2016, page 3, I think it's coming. Can we try that one again? CLG 1000, page 3. So I'm sorry about this. It seems to have got stuck. We can go to page 3 of this document. It's only a 12-page document, so. Yes, thank you very much. That's lovely. You can see the contents, yes?
Yes.
And you have B1, means of warning and escape, B3, internal fire spread structure, B5, B1, B3, B5.
Yeah.
And let's pick up one or two examples. If we scroll down let's pick the contents for this first question. Do you know how the matters that are addressed in this document selected for inclusion?
I would expect that the desk officer, obviously on the basis of questions which were raised with him or her, would then think, well, the best, rather than dealing with ad hoc queries, the best way of tackling this would be to put something on the FAQ list.
Now let's look at some of the specific questions that get asked. So page 4, fire doors. Here's a question. Can I use a 30-minute rated fire door without intumescent seals where ADB asks for a 20-minute fire door? And the answer is, this is something you should check with the building control body. Many do accept this arrangement where they're satisfied it'll provide sufficient level of protection to escape routes within dwellings. Building Control Alliance Technical Guidance Note 9 provides further advice. So just pausing there, here is the department signposting a technical guidance note from the BCA as something to follow.
Yes.
If you scroll down, you can see the next one is fire suppression systems. Should all buildings have a sprinkler system? There's a question about BS 9999. There's a question at the foot of page 3 about, it's quite technical, about smoke alarms in accordance with a British standard to at least grade D category LD3 standard. However, Table 1 of the BS recommends grade D category LD2. Now, never mind the details. Is that the kind of question that you find in FAQs with answers that follow?
That would be the sort of thing that the FAQs would cover, yes.
Okay, and we can go down. There's one on page 6. Sorry, page 8. Let's go to page 8. Middle of the page. Why do we say one bed and not one person for care homes? Paragraph 3.9 in volume 2 of ADB states bedrooms should not contain more than one bed. This includes a double bed. This is for a design without sprinklers relying on fire resisting construction to protect occupants that are remote from the seat of the fire. So this tells you the purpose of the regulation.
Yeah.
And matters of that nature. And one can go to the end.
Yes.
On and on. I'm not going to spend too much time doing it, but the sort of things you see here across a very wide scope. Who would provide the draft of the text of the answers?
The desk officer.
Brian Martin.
So in the context of this FAQ, yes.
Yes, this is fine. And what was the process by which the text of a draft FAQ would be cleared before being published on the department's website?
So I would expect the desk officer to obviously prepare the draft. If he or she actually felt that, for example, it did need to be cleared by lawyers, then I would expect that to happen. If, for example, it was an FAQ that was arising from questions being asked by building control bodies, then it may well, the desk officer may well want to talk with, for example, the LABC because ultimately this is about helping building control bodies as well as duty holders in terms of assessing compliance. So there would have been that process. Ultimately, all things that go on the department's website would need to be cleared through an internal process with our communications team. I would anticipate that the desk officer would, for example, also discuss this with the relevant head of the technical team, so that they were aware of this. So that's the sort of process I would expect.
Now, going back to the examples I showed you, let me expand the search a little bit. Can we start with page 7, foot of page 7, and this is under the question, should a fire alarm be provided throughout a block of flats? And it says, the guidance in B1, section 1 of the approved document, fire alarm and fire detection systems, is not intended to be applied to the common parts of blocks of flats and does not include a provision to interconnect installations in separate flats. If we then scroll down to a different question and a different answer under the beds in care homes on page 8, which I read to you, in the last paragraph of that, just above requirement B3 internal fire spread, it says, it is not the intention of the approved document to separate couples who happen to live in a care home by insisting that they sleep in separate beds. Now, in both of those instances, it's clear, is it not, that this document was a means by which the intent of particular existing provisions in the approved document could be made clear to the reader?
Yes.
Yes. Now, given the cyclical process of reviews of approved document B, which we've already covered, I think you agree that it was part of your division's role in the years between those reviews to become or be up to date about changes in construction or design practices, which would need to be taken into account when considering potential changes.
That was part of the role, yes.
Yes. And if we look at your statement, please, page 59, paragraph 232, you say, the department had a number of mechanisms in place to capture knowledge about changes in building design, construction practice, or use of materials which might need to be taken into account in reviews of the building regulations and guidance. And you go on at the next paragraph, 233, on the next page, page 60, to list the mechanisms to which you're referring, and you explain that those included a cyclical review, research commissioned by the division, feedback from industry, involvement in the preparation of new relevant British or European standards, and BRAC subcommittee leading reviews. Now, just focusing on C there, feedback from industry, is it fair to say that the reason it was important for the technical team to develop and maintain networks of contacts was because through feedback from those contacts, the department could ensure that it kept up to date with changes in construction and materials?
Yes.
Yes. And in the period in which you were in post, to whom would the role of gathering that kind of information principally fall?
So the desk officers would gather that information and would, I expect, would then distill from that whether the issues that they, or the information that they had received, needed to be factored into any of the outputs for which we were responsible, obviously primarily the reviews of approved documents. I would anticipate and expect that the technical policy team leads would be discussing that with the head of the technical policy team as well.
Right.
And I would expect also probably there would be quite a bit of, as part of the feedback process, it wouldn't just be one way, there would be an iteration going on between the technical policy lead and their relevant networks about the particular issues which were arising.
Right, and in the period 2012 or 2013 to 2017, the desk officer would have been Brian Martin.
It would, yes.
And the policy lead would, I think, have been Richard Harrell.
Well, Anthony Bird until the end of 2013,
Indeed.
and then Richard Harrell thereafter, yes.
Yes. Now, can we look at Brian Martin's statement, please, at CLG 30194669, page 55, paragraph 157. He says this: there was no specific mechanism to monitor changes in building design, construction practice and use of materials. As I've stated above, it was not the function of the Building Regulations Division to review or approve innovative construction procedures or methods of construction. The approved documents provide guidance on common building practices, and building designers and building control bodies are expected to use the approved document as a benchmark. Where innovative products and methods of construction are adopted, there is an expectation that they will use skill and judgment in order to ensure that the functional requirements of the regulations are met. Now, am I right in thinking that neither you nor indeed anybody else would suggest that it was the department's role to approve innovative methods of design or construction?
No, it was not our role to approve.
But do you agree that it was part of the function of your division to keep methods under review?
Well, it certainly...
To know about them?
It was to know about them, to gather intelligence about them. That would be part of that horizon scanning role, which I discussed yesterday.
You did, yes. And now, can you help us understand how it could be that this view that he suggests here of the division's role and his own role, which was not to review innovative construction methods and products, is at odds with yours?
Well, I can't determine exactly what Mr. Martin meant when he wrote this sentence, but clearly he engaged with industry contacts to understand developments in the fire industry and the sector. So if indeed he meant that we didn't do that horizon scanning role, then I'm surprised that he said that, and I'm sure he didn't mean that, even though I can see why it looks like that on the page.
Now, you were asked a series of questions by the inquiry about your own awareness, or otherwise, during the period 2011 to 2017.
Correct.
About the use of combustible materials on the external surfaces of high-rise buildings. Yes?
Yes.
And you were also asked about your awareness of any debate or any difference of opinion or interpretation or lack of clarity in relation to the guidance, and particularly 12.6 and 12.7
Correct.
of the 2006 edition of ADB. Now, if we can look at one part of your answer to those questions in your statement, it's at CLG 3019465, page 55, paragraph 209, please. And you say, at paragraph 209, I do not recall being involved in any meetings with external bodies, nor at the time seeing any correspondence about the lack of clarity of the relevant sections of ADB. Other members of the division may well have received representations from external bodies about clarity of the guidance on this specific topic. It is, of course, possible that I had oral conversations with members of the team who did have external contacts about this issue, but cannot now remember any. And then if you go on, please, to page 57, para 220, 2 pages on, you say, I am only aware of one specific case which was brought to our attention in July 2014 of the potential misclassification of an insulation product leading to the issue of an incorrect certificate by a certification body. Now, we're going to come back to that specific case later in your evidence, but putting that on one side if we can, and also putting aside the more general concerns raised with the department about the increasing use of combustible materials in external wall build-ups and modern methods of construction, can we be clear? Were you aware at any time before the Grenfell Tower fire of any problem with the guidance in 12.6 and 12.7 of approved document B?
In terms of the specific 12.6, 12.7, because obviously there was the general point made by the coroner, but setting that aside, I don't recall anyone speaking to me about an issue associated with the specific words in those paragraphs.
Right. Were you aware at any time before the Grenfell Tower fire of any debate or difference of opinion or interpretation about the scope or meaning of the guidance in 12.6 and 12.7 in the industry?
I cannot recall, as I said in my statement, I cannot recall discussing or having discussions about that. It may have happened, but I cannot recall.
Right. Now, it follows that I think I know the answer to the next question, but I should ask it. Were you ever aware of, at any time before the Grenfell Tower fire, of any lack of clarity or uncertainty on Mr. Martin's part in relation to the scope or meaning of the guidance in paragraphs 12.6 or 12.7 of approved document B?
No.
Were you aware of any uncertainty or lack of clarity in his mind about the meaning of the words filler, material, etc.?
No.
Did you ever hear any discussion within the department about the meaning of those words?
Not that I can recall.
So none of that was ever raised with you?
Not that I can recall. But I say this is my recollection.
Right. Can we take it, therefore, that you are well aware now that there had been, for some years before the fire at Grenfell Tower, an active debate on this subject?
I'm aware of the debates, yes.
When did you first become aware that specific debate had been going on during the period you were in post, or at least for much of it?
Well, I would think it would have been pretty rapidly after the fire.
From whom did you come to learn about that?
Well, I think that would... I can't recall who may have specifically raised it with me. Clearly, as we looked into the as in the immediate aftermath of the fire, the question of what the guidance says was obviously a very important topic. So at that point, that would be when I became aware of the concerns about, or the issues about 12.6 and 12.7. I can't remember who specifically would have told me that.
Right. Can you remember the circumstances in which it came to your attention?
Well, it would have come to our attention because the question was being asked about compliance as to whether, given the understanding at that point in time of the materials which had contributed to the fire, and and obviously setting aside what we knew at the time, whether they complied with the building regulations requirements. And from that, obviously, one looked as well both at the functional requirement, and then obviously there was reference to the relevant part of the guidance, so 12.6, 12.7, and at that point we obviously looked at that in quite some detail.
And do you remember what you were told?
I was told that the guidance in 12.7 was intended to cover materials such as though an aluminium panel with a polyethylene core. So that would be not a product of limited combustibility and therefore not in compliance with the requirements.
Now, let's just be precise. In that last answer, you said it was intended, you were told, to cover materials such as an aluminium panel with a polyethylene core. Were you told that 12.7 was intended to cover the entire product, including the aluminium facing?
Yes.
Who told you that?
Well, that's what I would have been told that by Mr. Martin.
Now, I need very great clarity on this. Are you sure he told you that, or did he tell you that only the core of such a product?
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. Yes. I can see why. Mr. I would have... The interactions of the Class 0 provision related to surface spread and the provisions relating to limited combustibility, Mr. Martin would have explained those to me. So sorry, to be clear, that is what would have happened.
Well, all right. Doing the best you can with your recollection. What did Mr. Martin tell you? Did he tell you that the core had to be of limited combustibility, or did he tell you that the entire product had to be of limited combustibility?
I cannot recall precisely what he would have said.
When you learnt of the problem, did you go at that time to the text of the guidance, 12.6 or 12.7, to see for yourself what the source of the problem was?
Yes.
You did. And what did you find out?
Well, obviously there was the text in the approved document, and I would have quizzed Mr. Martin to understand exactly whether a product such as the ACM panels used on Grenfell would have been in compliance with the guidance in the in Section 12.
Did you have a discussion with Mr. Martin about the fact that there had been a debate going on in the industry, at least for as long as since the summer of 2014, if not earlier, about the meaning and scope of 12.6 and 12.7?
I don't recall asking Mr. Martin that question precisely.
Did he tell you that that had been the case?
I'm trying to recall whether we had that conversation. I mean, obviously, it was a very fast-moving situation, so I cannot be absolutely clear at what point I gathered various bits of information and from whom. So I wouldn't want to say that I'm afraid I find it very difficult to give you a definitive answer to that question.
Right. You don't. I think your evidence. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
We need to understand it very well.
Yes,
is that you don't recall being told by Brian Martin that a debate, a controversy had existed in the UK construction industry about the meaning of 12.7, in particular the meaning of the word filler.
So I don't recall precisely what conversations there would have been about this and whether this was covered, and if so, how, and if so, when. Clearly, as the events and the investigations unfolded, and in particular as we found many more buildings had ACM core panels on them than we had anticipated as we did through the initial testing series, that raised questions about why was this the case, which clearly raised issues as to why people felt that these panels were indeed compliant. So I think by that stage, obviously there was an issue for us that clearly, for whatever reason, there was people were not interpreting those provisions in the approved document in the way that was our interpretation, the department's interpretation. Otherwise, that those materials would not have been on buildings.
Did Brian Martin tell you that there had been a controversy, different points of view, perhaps, out there in the UK construction industry on the meaning and scope of 12.7?
As I say, I'm finding it difficult to recall exactly. I'd find it surprising if he didn't tell me, because otherwise, why would there have been so many of these panels on other buildings?
Well, that's the
yes,
that's the point.
Exactly. I appreciate the point you're trying to make.
Well, I'm just trying to get your evidence.
I'm sorry. And I'm struggling to think at what point I became more really aware of the debates that have been happening in some of the industry associations. And I find it quite difficult to recall at what point that was.
Well, do you recall becoming aware that there was a debate or had been a debate? Just that fact.
Sure. So I became aware, I was made aware, or found out or discovered from various things that were being said that there had been that debate. What I'm struggling with, as it were, is when that first came to my attention and appreciation.
Well, that was going to be my next question.
Yes.
We've got to the point when you
Yes.
learned that there had been a debate, and maybe was still a debate.
Yes.
Can you remember when you learned of that?
Well, I'm thinking it must have been pretty early on, post-Grenfell, because, as I said, clearly there were problems because we'd seen these panels. So I imagine I would have been told, I'm sure I would have been told that clearly there was parts of the industry were interpreting that term or that provision in approved document B differently from our intention. Whether I was told there was a controversy, I don't, in those terms, I don't recall.
And do you have any recollection of how it was you learned of that, of the existence of that controversy?
Well, at a point in time, for example, I became aware of the exchanges that the CWCT had at its meeting, at some of the meetings. So I became aware of that. At what point precisely I became aware of that, I'm afraid I don't recall.
Right.
But I suppose sorry, forgive me. I think I'm struggling with terms like controversy, as opposed to terms like misunderstandings or differences of interpretation, which I was obviously became rapidly aware of because of the problems that we discovered. But I'm not sure I made sort of a leap from that to say, oh, there's been a controversy about this.
Well, difference of opinion, I think, will do for present.
Difference of opinion. Well, clearly there had been differences of opinion, as reflected in the fact that designers and others had taken decisions for these panels to be installed on buildings. So, in that respect, Chairman, yes.
Were you not surprised to learn that there was a difference of opinion so significant?
Well, of course, I was surprised as to why there was such a problem of compliance and such a widespread problem of compliance.
Did you ask Brian Martin to explain to you how it had come about that you had not known about this difference of opinion out there in the industry before the fire?
I don't recall asking him that precise question. Things were moving very fast at that time, and we were obviously focusing on what needed to be done at that point in time, rather than looking back on the circumstances of how those differences of opinion on ADB 12, Section 12 had come to pass.
Well, did it not strike you at the time that the fact that you had not learnt about this difference of opinion out there in the industry indicated that something with the horizon scanning of the policy of the department had gone seriously wrong?
Well, I would certainly accept that.
Did you not ask Brian Martin to explain to you, in simple terms, how come?
I'm trying to think of the sorts of conversations. Clearly, we would have had conversations, including at very senior levels as well, as to why things that we discovered had happened. And there were discussions as to and close attention paid to the drafting of that section of the approved document. So clearly, we senior officials, ministers, wanted to understand that question and wanted to understand why there were those differences of view. So I would have been speaking to Brian about that. I don't think I asked him in terms, because we were so focused on what was happening in the future. Why didn't you tell me that earlier? I may have done. I don't recall having that conversation with him at that.
Well, whether you asked him or not, did Brian Martin ever offer you an explanation about what he knew about differences of opinion, and to the extent that he knew it, why he didn't tell you?
Well, I mean, as more evidence emerged over time, and I became aware of evidence of differences of opinion, then I asked Brian for the background of what was going on.
Did he ever explain to you why he hadn't told you that there was a difference of opinion out there, and that people have been asking questions about 12.6 and 12.7 for some time?
Yes, they had, as I discovered.
Yes, and did he tell you why you hadn't discovered that? Did he explain to you why it was that you hadn't learnt that until after the fire?
Mr. Martin was very clear in the discussions that we had about the interpretation of what those provisions in ADB were intended to achieve, and therefore that was he gave me very clear advice as to what the interpretation of those provisions were, and we discussed those, and I wanted to understand those, and so I had a better understanding of what ADB 12 said and was intended to say. So in that sense, he would have explained the background,
Right.
Including reference back to the rationale for changes originally in ADB in the ADB 2006.
But did you ask him whether he was surprised to learn that so many people had misunderstood 12.6 and 12.7 as he would have it?
Well, we were shocked when we started to uncover the extent of and the number of buildings that were covered in ACM.
You say we were shocked.
I mean, collectively.
From what you could see, was he shocked?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Yes, I think it is. We'll have a break for the afternoon now, Mr. Ledsome. We'll come back at 20 to 4, please.
Yes.
And as before, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence over the break. All right? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Millett. 20 to 4, please. Thank you. Would you ask Mr. Ledsome to come back in, please? All right, Mr. Ledsome, ready to carry on? Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Millett?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Ledsome, can I ask you please to be shown Mr. Martin's witness statement again? Page 54, paragraph 155. And he says there were certainly concerns raised about the testing of cladding products, including ACM panels and insulation materials, during the period 2009 to 14th of June 2017, and I was aware, as were senior officials within the department, of the issues regarding the testing of such products. However, within the context of the system of building regulations in England, it was my view that relevant industry bodies were taking appropriate steps to produce guidance and ensure that the functional requirements of the regulations, particularly requirement B4, were being met. Where I was able to, I tried to assist the industry during the period in question, drawing on my knowledge from both my time in the department and at BRE previously. Now, focusing on what he says in the first part of that paragraph, were you, as the senior or a senior official within the department, aware of, quotes, concerns raised about the testing of cladding products, including ACM panels and insulation materials in that period?
Well, I was certainly aware, or was made aware, as I said in my witness statement, of the issues around the classification or the test, the BBA certificate. That was drawn to my attention. So I was certainly aware of that, and I presume that is what Mr. Martin is referring to here.
Right. Do you, or can you, as a senior official, recall any other concerns raised about the testing of cladding products, including ACM panels?
I don't recall any discussions, specifically about the testing of ACM products during this period. Right.
So far as you can recall, the only thing you were aware about representing a concern was about insulation materials and specifically the BBA certificate. Would this be right in relation to Kingspan K15?
Yes, I believe that's correct. I mean,
in relation to Kingspan K15?
Yes, so clearly, I mean, I was made aware of that.
Now, in the period between 2011 and 2017, June 2017, were you aware of ACM panels and ACM panels specifically with a polyethylene core as a product used in the external cladding system of high-rise buildings?
No.
Did you not hear about those products in the context of discussions in 2015 and 2016 about cladding fires internationally, in particular?
Apologies. I was aware from some of those fires that ACM panels or similar may have been involved, and the advice that I received was that may be the case, but that the way that the building regulations and the approved document guidance were written should ensure that such panels should not be used on buildings in England because they would not be compliant.
Who gave you that advice?
That advice would have come to me from Mr. Martin,
right.
Either directly or indirectly insofar as he was referring or replying to queries from others.
Now, we may come back to that in due course. Were you made aware at any time during your tenure as Deputy Director of the Division that the Department had undertaken a full-scale test at the BRE on a system incorporating ACM panels with a polyethylene core back in July 2001, long before your time, as part of a government-funded project to review the guidance in BR 135?
No.
You were never made aware of that?
I was not made aware of that in the period leading up to the Grenfell fire.
Right. You, I think, are aware of it now.
I'm aware of it now.
How did you, well, when did you first come to learn about the existence of that test?
Well, I have to say that I believe it was first aware of it actually after I had left my post in the Technical Policy Division. I think that there was reference to it. I think there may have been a BBC report, or there was a report referred to it, and that was the first time I was aware of that. Obviously, I was not in a position to respond to that report, A, because I didn't know about it, and B, I'd moved role at that point in time. So that was, that must at least have been after June 2019.
Yes. Well, I think in the course of this inquiry, in fact.
Indeed, yes. Apologies, yes.
Were you made aware, or did you at any time ever hear any discussions about concerns relating to the use of ACM panels with a polyethylene core, or an otherwise combustible core, in the external wall of arrangements of buildings over 18 metres in England and Wales?
No, because, as I said, when queries were raised about whether the fires in Dubai, etc., could happen in the UK, the advice received was that no, because they were non-compliant with building regulations requirements.
So can we take it from that answer that if you had been asked the question, are ACM panels with a polyethylene core permissible above 18 metres in England and Wales, in fact the UK generally, you would have said no?
I would have said no.
On the basis of what? An assurance by Mr. Martin that that was the
advice
case?
received, yes.
Advice received?
Yes.
Did you yourself have any understanding in that period about the dangers presented to occupants of high-rise buildings by ACM polyethylene core products when used in external cladding systems?
Well, I had an understanding insofar as obviously there had been those fires in Dubai, etc., which obviously were shocking. Fortunately, the results were not, in terms of fatalities, etc., were mercifully less. But in terms of issues in England and Wales, no, because as I say, the advice I received was that they would be non-compliant and therefore should not be being used. Right.
Was it your understanding that it was quite clear from the approved documents, approved document B in particular, that aluminium composite panels with a polyethylene core were banned above 18 metres?
Well, the advice that I received led me to believe that yes, they were non-compliant, therefore they would not be used. Was
that advice that you saw or heard based on any analysis of the language of the provisions of approved document B, which would lead you to that conclusion?
The advice I received would have referred to the functional requirement and possibly to ADB in general terms. I don't think the advice I received set out in forensic detail the relevant provisions, particularly of ADB. Right. Section 12.
Did you know that it was the view of Debbie Smith, Dr. Debbie Smith of the BRE, that an ACM panel with a polyethylene core should, as she told us, never ever be used on a building over 18 metres?
Well, I was not aware of that until she made that statement to the inquiry.
Right. Now, I'd like to ask you about some documents in 2013. Can we start, please, with CLG 100058595? This is an email run in November 2013 between Brian Martin and Tony Baker of the BRE. We don't need, I think, to go through the whole of this chain, but I need to set it in context. If we start at the bottom of page 2, you can see that here is an email from Tony Baker to Brian Martin, copied to Sarah Colwell and Stephen Howard, on the 25th of November 2013. And he writes as follows: "Hi Brian, hope you're keeping well. I hope you can help with the following. We are seeing an increasing number of inquiries in which we're being asked for our opinion, stroke interpretation of Diagram 40 and ADB B4 clauses 12.6 and 7 in relation to the build-up of systems using board finishes. We would like to reach a general understanding so we can respond to all parties in the same way." And then there's some bullet points. First bullet point: systems with board-type outer layers, the boards are typically 15 to 20 millimetres thick and achieve B-S3D2. Clause 12.6 guidance references Diagram 40 in relation to the classification of the finish, which would be acceptable over 18 metres as being B-S3D2, but 12.7 talks about insulation or filler materials which make up the wall being limited combustibility. As the maximum surface finish is not defined, a debate has opened up within the industry as to whether or not the boards can be called the finish or the filler. And then if you turn the page, based on our experience from the original PII programme, we would suggest that the definition of the surface finish thickness and filler would assist in clarifying this point and would therefore be grateful for your thoughts. Now, that's the first in the chain.
Yeah.
My first question is to you. Have you seen this correspondence previously?
No.
So it wasn't forwarded to you at the time?
I don't recall that it was forwarded to me at the time, no.
Right. Were you aware in or after November 2013 that the BRE had been receiving inquiries about the definition of the word filler in paragraph 12.7 of the approved document B, or any other of the matters to which Tony Baker refers in this email?
I do not recall being told that.
So Brian Martin hadn't mentioned this to you?
I
even
don't
in
recall
passing?
him mentioning it to me in part. He may have done, but I don't recall that.
Were you aware that in approved document B, and indeed in the approved documents generally, keywords and phrases were ordinarily listed and defined?
Well, I'm aware that obviously there are a glossary of terms, yes.
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 Were you aware that the term filler or filler material, etc., as contained in paragraph 12.7 after 2006, was never defined?
Well, I wouldn't have been aware at the time. I mean, clearly, subsequently, that would have been apparent to me.
Now, if a definition of a particular word or phrase had not been provided in the glossary in the approved document, and it came about later to be seen to be needed, would it fall to the department to provide such a definition?
It certainly we could provide such a definition. Yes.
Yes, and that would fall to your building regulations team. Yes.
And that would fall to the building regulations team to take forward. Yes.
And in that team, Brian Martin. Yes.
In respect of ADB, Brian Martin, yes.
In respect of ADB,
yes.
And that could be done, could it, by way of, for example, a circular or an FAQ?
Depending on exactly what clarification was needed, then those could have been used as ways to communicate. Yes.
Thank you. And then if we go back to the email run, please, page 2 at the top, I'd like to show you Brian Martin's response, which is sent just over half an hour later on that day, 25th of November 2013, and he says this: "Hi Tony, I see where you're coming from. The problem we have with Class B is that you can have a thin surface that gives you the performance and back it with something less desirable. So there's no such thing as a Class B material. The word filler was introduced because of a particular incident where a polymeric foam was used to keep an aluminium panel stiff. The foam was not used for thermal reasons, so it wasn't insulation, quotes unquotes. It still burned, of course, exclamation marks. Sarah will remember the details, I'm sure. I'm thinking out loud here, but I think a homogeneous Class B board would be fine, effectively a Class B material, question mark. But a lamination of board with something else should revert to the limited combustibility criteria." Does this make sense? Don't quote me on this yet. What do you think, Brian? Now, putting aside the technical detail of the question that Brian Martin is considering here, were you aware in late 2013 or at any time after that the meaning and the scope of the word filler material in paragraph 12.7 of approved document B, in other words, what elements of an external wall were to be of limited combustibility, were matters which Brian Martin appeared to be undecided about?
No.
We've seen from the evidence of other witnesses that after this exchange, a meeting was arranged which took place on the 30th of January 2014 at Eland House between Brian Martin and Sarah Colwell and Tony Baker of the BRE. Were you aware of that meeting taking place at the time, do you think?
I don't recall being aware of it.
You don't know what was discussed or what was resolved?
No.
Did Mr. Martin not report it to you?
Well, he did not report it to me. Whether he reported it to Mr. Harrell, I don't know.
All right. Now, looking at it now, do you consider that there were matters, the meeting, for example, perhaps the need for a definition of the term filler, which you should have been made aware of?
Well, clearly there are issues here which I would have expected Mr. Martin in the first instance to talk to the relevant head of technical policy team. And then if necessary, if it's felt necessary to draw to my attention, then yes, to draw to my attention.
And Richard Harrell being that person?
Richard Harrell being that person, though admittedly in early 2014, clearly he'd only been in post for a month or so.
Well, quite. I see. Moving forward into 2014, further, I'll give you a fact. It is a fact that on the 2nd of July 2014, a meeting of the CWCT fire group was held, and Brian Martin attended the meeting, at least for some of it.
Yes.
Now, take this from me, that the meeting had been arranged in order for a cross-section of industry, fire safety experts, manufacturers and others to discuss a number of issues on which the CWCT had been receiving inquiries, right? And I'm assuming that you're familiar with the body CWCT.
Yes.
Yes. And some of those issues, or one of those issues, included the use of composite panels, such as ACM, and the use of combustible insulation.
Yes.
Were you aware at the time that that meeting was taking place?
I don't believe so.
Would you not know if one of your officials was out of the office at meetings with industry bodies?
Well, I would not necessarily know that one of the desk officers was out meeting industry. That was part of their job. So I would not be, as it were, interrogating their diary. So, no, it's perfectly reasonable that I would not have known that Brian was at that meeting.
All right. But there was no system of reporting back to you or perhaps to Richard Harrell when he came back and gave a debrief?
Well, it would depend on exactly what the nature of the meeting was and what the conclusions of that meeting were and what Mr. Martin or any other desk officer in any other area had drawn from that meeting. There wouldn't have been a formal debrief as such. It would have depended on the circumstances.
Now, we know that the department was a papers-only member of the BCA.
Yes.
The Building Control Alliance. Did you ever get to see the papers sent to members of the BCA relating to matters discussed at their meetings?
Not as a matter of course, no.
Who would?
So the department had a quasi-observer status on the BCA, so we would occasionally attend meetings in that capacity, and indeed I did attend once or twice meetings of the BCA in a sort of general capacity. I'm not sure whether there were papers at that meeting, but certainly we were not there as a participant. With regard to technical groups developing technical guidance notes, then I think it would depend to an extent on the circumstances as to whether members of the technical team, the relevant member of the technical team, was involved or asked to comment on papers.
Now let's go to the minutes of the CWCT meeting. CLG 30193336. Now, just casting your eye down it, you can see, if we can just expand it, please, a little, we can see it more clearly. It was held on Wednesday, the 2nd of July, 2014 at 2 p.m. And if you look at the list of attendees, you can see who's there.
Yeah.
David Metcalf in the chair. Sarah Colwell is there. Barbara Lane from Arab Fire is there. Brian Martin is there from the DCLG, yes?
Yes.
Now, have you seen this minute previously?
I've seen this minute previous to today because it was, the circumstances of this meeting were drawn to the department's attention post Grenfell.
Yeah. Did you see it at the time, do you think?
I don't think I saw it at the time, i.e. July 2014, no.
Now, I'm not going to go through all of it with you, but I do want to ask you about two particular sections of it. Can we go, please, to page 3, first of all, final heading there, and you can see on that page, use of ACM on high-rise buildings. Now, let's look at that. It says this: ACM refers to aluminium composite material. The normal material, consists of two skins of aluminium, approximately 0.5 millimetres thick, separated by a polyethylene core 2 to 5 millimetres thick. This material generally achieves a reaction to fire classification of Class 0 or Class B S1 D0. There are versions available with a mineral core which can achieve A2 S1 D0. There are also similar materials available with other materials such as copper used for the facing. There have been major fires in buildings in various parts of the world, including the Middle East and France, where ACM materials have been used for the cladding, with the ACM responsible for the external fire spread. Were you made aware of these discussions by Brian Martin at any time?
Well, not at the time of this meeting.
at any time after that?
Well, subsequently, but that is after the fire, yes.
Were you aware at the time or later, any time up to the Grenfell Tower fire, that the normal material, it's the phrase used in the first line there, comprising an ACM panel consisted of 2 skins of aluminium over a PE core?
I wouldn't have been aware at the time.
Did you know how commonly those products were being used above 18 metres in the United Kingdom?
No.
Now, I think you were aware at that date that there had been major fires in other parts of the world involving ACM panels and external fire spread, as you've told us.
Yes.
Coming back to that topic, those, I think, had been discussed within the team as far as you were aware, hadn't they?
Well, there have been some exchanges involving... I'd asked a question at one point, and I think there was an exchange which I believe I was probably copied into, or I saw subsequently, that Mr. Martin had with the then Chief Fire Officer similarly, to ask about whether the circumstances of the fire, of that particular fire, would be likely in the UK, and I believe Mr. Martin answered that the materials, as were understood to have been involved, would not be compliant with building regulations and therefore should not be being used.
Right. Now, looking back at the minutes, in the second paragraph on page 4, which is the second part of the document I want to look at with you, after the words in italics at the top, which is a reference to an academic article, it says this: it was stated that clause 12.7 of ADB is intended to prohibit the use of polyethylene cord ACM in buildings over 18 metres, as they are not classed as limited combustibility. This is not clear from the wording of the current clause. The current clause is preceded by a heading, Insulation Materials / Products, which implies that it only applies to insulation. The wording of the main text refers to filler materials, which could be taken to include the polyethylene core, but this is not clear. It was suggested that clarification could be achieved by means of an FAQ. Approved documents can be downloaded from, and then there's a planning portal website link. The page for each approved document also has an FAQ section related to that approved document. Sarah Colwell agreed to raise this with Brian Martin. Were you made aware by Brian Martin, following this meeting, or at any time after this meeting, that members of the CWCT fire group had reached a consensus that guidance into paragraph 12.7 was not clear?
No.
Not at all.
Well, not in the period up until the Grenfell fire.
Were you made aware by Brian Martin that it was not clearly understood by at least some in the industry that the paragraph was apparently, quotes, intended to prohibit the use of polyethylene cord ACM in buildings over 18 metres? Close quotes.
Well, he didn't make me... I don't remember having a discussion or being briefed to that effect.
So does it follow that, although you were told, as it were, it couldn't happen here in relation to the UAE fires, he never gave you the analysis in order to support that?
Well, he didn't give me a detailed analysis, no.
Right. Why didn't you ask for one?
Because I took the advice that he provided as an experienced fire safety professional, obviously well versed in the guidance, understanding, experience of the guidance. That therefore, his view and opinion was soundly based.
Do you consider that you should have been made aware of these discussions and the lack of clarity, as perceived by this group at least, in paragraph 12.7 of ADB, as understood by those using the document?
Well, this would have been certainly something that I would have expected, and I think there's a bit of debate. I don't know whether Mr. Martin was at this point, at this part of the discussion or not, but certainly, given these points raised, I would have expected at the very least that we should look at that as part of the clarification, ADB section 12, a clarification process.
Right. Are you able to enlighten us about how it came about that you weren't told about these matters?
No, I mean, this is with the benefit of hindsight. And as well as, I think there was, I think when I did become aware of these minutes, I did ask about, what happened, and I was led to understand that this Mr. Martin had not been party to this discussion at this point because he was only there for part of the meeting, which is why the action and the last sentence refers to Sarah Colwell agreed to raise this with Brian Martin, so that implies that he wasn't there to hear this. Now, I don't know what happened in that regard. So in that sense, I don't know what Brian knew when to be able to tell either Mr. Harrell or me. So that was the first point. And again, the second point, and again, I accept that this is with the benefit of hindsight. I am now aware of the work which was happening in relation to the BCA Guidance Note 18, which was covering similar ground in terms of providing supplementary guidance on the operation of an implementation and understanding of Section 12. I don't know for information whether anybody, for example, from either the LABC or any of the approved inspector organisations was at this meeting to have made, as it were, join those dots. So those were two things which were happening at about this time, and I believe Mr. Martin was aware, or if he was not aware at this point in time, he was aware relatively soon thereafter about the work related to BCA Guidance Note 18. So clearly there would have been a consideration that if the BCA is going to issue some guidance doing the same thing, is that going to, as it were, deal with the issue? I didn't have that debate with Mr. Martin. That was not, to my recollection, discussed with me. So I am slightly speculating here.
Well, as you said, it's hindsight. I mean, were you aware of BCA Technical Guidance Note 18 at the time?
Not at the time it was published, no.
At any time before the Grenfell Tower fire?
I'm trying to recall whether I was aware of it before Grenfell. I might have been, but not in the sense, but just in a general sense that they have published this guidance note without interrogating the whys and wherefores or rationale for it.
Were you aware in July 2014, going back to this document on the screen, that the heading of paragraph 12.7 of approved document B, insulation materials stroke products, had led some readers at least to understand that paragraph referred to insulation rather than any part of the external cladding panel?
I do not believe I was.
Right. Did you ever hear any discussion about the possibility of drafting or publishing an FAQ on this subject?
I can't recall that.
Right.
I mean, in the first instance, I would imagine would have been discussed with Mr. Harrell, but I don't know if those discussions happened, and I don't recall it being raised with me.
And it sounds from your earlier evidence about FAQs generally that there would have been no difficulty or anything precluding the department from publishing an FAQ on this subject, as Sarah Colwell suggests.
There would have been in principle, there would have been a bit of process to go through, as I described, but in principle, as this was a clarification, then I think it would have been legitimate for us to consider an FAQ or a letter to building control, some of the mechanisms which we talked about earlier. Now,
do you know, can you agree that no other action was taken to clarify 12.7 in any formal way, for example, a circular or an FAQ? Was that decision not to do so taken by Brian Martin alone, or by Brian Martin and Richard Harrell, or by all of you?
Well, I don't recall, as I say, I don't recall discussions about this.
Right.
And as I say, given the, as I understand it, the ambiguity of the message that was passed on to Mr. Martin, then in relation to the action, I'm fine. I can't really comment.
I see. So, and that's because you simply
I was not aware.
weren't aware and weren't a party to any of the
I wasn't a
discussion.
party to any of the discussions. No.
Now, can we go back to your statement, CLG 30194465, page 57, paragraph 220? We looked at this passage very briefly earlier on in your evidence, Mr. Ledsome.
Yes.
In relation to the use of combustible insulation on high-rises. And you say, this, as you said, I was only aware of one specific case, and we've already read that aloud to you. I'm not going to read it aloud again. You go on to say, this was dealt with by the G7 technical team leader, Brian Martin, who followed the matter up with the National House Builders Council, NHBC, and then the British Board of Agreement, BBA, the classification body concerned. The BBA informed us of the actions which they had taken as set out in the email exchanges. I was informed by Brian Martin of the case at the time and agreed that the actions he took. Can we look at the emails you're referring to? First, those with the NHBC, which we'll find at CLG 50686. Now, if you look at the top email in the chain, we may need to have that expanded a little bit. You can see that it's sent to you and Richard Harrell by Brian Martin on the 11th of July 2014 at 3:49. And he says, Richard Bob, see below. Yes?
Yes.
And he forwards a short chain of emails to you.
Yes.
Can we take it from the paragraph of your witness statement we've just looked at that you read the emails in the chain at that time?
Yes.
Yes. And did you look at the attachments, namely the BBA certificate or certificates for Kingspan's K15 product?
I imagine I would have looked at them. If you were going to ask me, did I understand the technical detail behind them, I probably would say no. But I would have been, obviously that was there as information that had been provided to us, so I think I probably would have at least looked at the certificate to understand what it was that was being talked about.
Okay, now let's go to page 2 in this email run, please. About halfway down that page. And you'll see an email sent by Brian Martin to Neil Smith at NHBC on the 2nd of July 2014 at 11:42 in the morning. Now, just to note, that's the morning of the afternoon, or the morning before the afternoon in which the CWCT meeting was held. He says this, "Hi Neil, I've been talking to a few folk about fire safety and facades recently. Allegedly, several buildings have been erected where PIR insulation has been used in cladding panels well over 18 metres in height. Apparently, people are under the impression that PIR is a material of limited combustibility, which it isn't. Again, allegedly, many of these buildings are blocks of flats. I've no idea how true these allegations are, but they come from relatively reliable sources. The purpose of my email is a friendly warning. You might want to double-check with your inspectors and plan checkers that they are on top of this. Happy to discuss. Regards, Brian." Now, before we go to the NHBC's response, had you discussed these allegations with Brian Martin before he sent this message?
I don't believe so.
Did you know he was communicating with the NHBC over this?
Not until he forwarded the email chain.
Right.
A few days later.
Would it have been normal to copy Richard Harrell and you into it? When it was sent, rather than forwarding it to you?
Not
later?
necessarily when it was sent, because as the email to Mr. Smith suggests, Mr. Martin had been identifying a worry, and he wanted to find out a little bit more about what was going on. So I think it was perfectly appropriate that he did that before he briefed Mr. Harrell and myself, as he did.
Did you know who the relatively reliable sources were from whom this information had come to Brian Martin?
Not specifically.
Did you ask him?
I can't recall if I asked him.
Did you?
Sorry.
Did you understand why this friendly warning, as he puts it, was sent in such, in particular, to the NHBC?
Well, obviously the NHBC were a significant approved inspector who undertook a lot of work in the house building sector. I don't know whether at this point in time there were any specific issues that affected or had been as part of the information that Mr. Martin had received, allegedly bore on any possible NHBC projects. But I think at this point what Mr. Martin is doing quite rightly is trying to understand, as he said, whether the NHBC knew about this and what they were doing about it, hence the request or the suggestion in the last paragraph of his email.
Yes, but do you know why he didn't send this friendly warning to other building control organisations such as the LABC or indeed the BCA itself?
Well, I think at this point in time it was appropriate to engage with the building control bodies as the enforcement or the compliance checking bodies.
Yes, hence my question, LABC
Indeed,
or BCA?
Well, the BCA is sort of not a... Sorry, I was drawing a distinction between the BCA as a mechanism for basically the private sector and the public sector building control bodies to work together. I'm presuming, and I don't know, I'm presuming that Mr. Martin may well have felt that as an organisation, the NHBC, which with its reach into the house building sector and the ability which it has as a central organisation which covers the whole of England, would be able to have a better sense and pull together information quickly about what was going on, as opposed to working through the LABC, where the only way the LABC probably could have responded to this was basically trying to talk to, all 300 local authority building controls, which obviously would have been a much more convoluted and lengthy process. So I think, and if that was his judgment, obviously he would have to answer that. I think that's a very sensible judgment to make. Let's talk to an organisation.
But you don't know?
I don't know, no.
Did you understand what he was saying there to be a serious safety issue?
Well, certainly it was a matter of concern.
Did you escalate it to any more senior official?
No.
Why is that?
Well, at this point, we wanted to find out what was going on. So I felt that we would need to understand better the issues that were behind this and what was happening and what the NHBC and in due time the BBA were doing, so that we had a clear, if we needed to escalate, we had a clear understanding of the nature of the problem and would be in a position to say something about it.
Now, you say in your statement, it's the final line of para 220, we don't need to go to it, that you were satisfied that Brian Martin had taken appropriate action in relation to this matter. Did you consider at the time that a friendly warning to just one building control organisation, albeit the NHBC, was an appropriate way of dealing with that matter?
What I meant was that he had taken action, firstly with the NHBC, and then subsequently, when there is the realisation that the issue was with the BBA, to take action to find out what was going on, which he did. And there was obviously the subsequent correspondence which Mr. Martin had with the BBA. And of course then subsequent follow-up correspondence with the NHBC.
Now let's go to the NHBC's response, which is the second email on the page, on page 1. If we go up to that. Now it's lengthy.
Yes.
But I just want to pick out the key parts if I can. It's a response from Steve Evans to Brian Martin dated the 11th of July, which came to you on the 15th, as we've seen, a copy to Diane Marshall and Neil Smith. And it says, "Dear Brian," etc. And then the second paragraph says, "The issue is in respect of the use of Kingspan Cooltherm K15 rain screen board in buildings over 18 metres in height. The confusion has arisen from Kingspan's statement that their product is acceptable for use in a building over 18 metres. However, since 27th of October 2008, the product held a BBA certificate attached which indicates that it is acceptable for use in accordance with approved document B, Volume 2, paragraph 12.7, 7.1, subject to advice being should be sought from the certificate holder, 7.2, if the building exceeds 18 metres in height. And then it says this: it was on this basis that NHBC Building Control and other building control bodies accepted the use of K15 in buildings over 18 metres in height, including blocks of flats. We understand that LABC have also issued a registered detail approving the material for use over 18 metres. In January of this year, we were made aware of a revised BBA certificate for K15 issued on 17th December 2013, also attached. The new certificate removed the passage which indicated that it was acceptable for use in accordance with approved document B, Volume 2, paragraph 12.7, and instead states that the product will not contribute to the development stages of a fire, but that it has only been tested and therefore is only suitable for one specific construction on masonry walls, 8.2. As we had a number of projects under construction and in advanced stages of design utilising K15, NHBC approached Kingspan and made them aware of our concerns. As a result of this dialogue, Kingspan are currently undertaking further testing using different cladding and facade treatments in accordance with BS 8414, Part 1, 2002. And then there's something about the tests being promised later in the year. And then in the next paragraph, it says this: there is no reason to suspect that buildings which have been built with Kingspan K15 are at risk at this time. It is just the fact that the testing carried out to date does not bear this out. Kingspan are confident that the testing currently underway will prove the suitability of the material for use over 18 metres. If they're not able to do this, we will begin the process of informing industry that the product is no longer suitable for use in facades over 18 metres, as well as informing other stakeholders such as the BCA and the Fire and Rescue Service, although both parties are already aware of our ongoing discussions. Now, that's long, I'm afraid, and there are some passages in there I've emphasised. But going back to your witness statement, please, page 57, paragraph 221, you say there, to put this in context, MHCLG is not an enforcement body, neither does it have a role in accrediting test and certification bodies such as the BBA. A member of my team, Brian Martin, followed up to see what action was taken. That action was judged to be appropriate. On the basis of the information provided, we concluded that the BBA had acted appropriately to withdraw the incorrect certificate and to take action to inform customers, as set out in the response from the BBA in the email chain. What action did you understand the BBA to have taken to inform customers, as you put it?
Well, I would have to refer to the emails that Mr. Martin had with the BBA to be able to recall exactly what
Right.
why we reached that conclusion.
What was the basis on which you understood that action had been taken to inform customers?
Well, I think we had received assurances from the BBA, or what I took to be assurances from the BBA.
Right. Did you read the assurances from the BBA for yourself?
Well, I was certainly copied in to the correspondence, or certainly some of the correspondence, including reports from the BBA as to what had happened and the action that they had taken. And I believe I must have, either they said directly or I took from what those emails said, that they had taken action to inform any of those who had been affected by the incorrect certificate.
Right. Now, let's look at BBA 50178, please. Let's see if you can help us with that. This is John Albon's email to Brian Martin of the 23rd of July 2014. So this is a couple of weeks or so after the 11th of July 2014 email. And he says, Brian, the mistake was basically caused by human error. The project manager involved and their line manager no longer work in the BBA's operations department. And then he goes on to explain how they're addressing the overall issue, training, an additional level of checking, more emphasis on certificate templates, etc., and an offer of a meeting. Is that the email you're referring to?
That must be the email I'm referring to.
There's no indication that you saw that at the time, did you? You think?
Whether I saw it on the 23rd of July, I don't know, but
Right.
I'm pretty sure that Mr. Martin forwarded it on to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have said what I said in my witness statement.
What communication from the department did you inform customers that the BBA certificate?
We didn't take any action to inform customers.
Right. Then if we look at page 58 of your statement, please, paragraph 222. you say there, MHCLG could have taken up this issue as a complaint made by MHCLG to the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, UCAS, asking for an investigation and possibly asking UCAS to consider removing BBA's accreditation. However, that was not thought appropriate in this instance because the evidence presented to us suggested that this was a one-off instance to which the BBA had responded appropriately and was not indicative of systemic issues which would warrant UCAS intervention. Then if you look at the next paragraph, 223, my understanding is that this was an issue about a product which had been misclassified. The testing processes and methodologies themselves were not, to my knowledge, raised as an issue. Now, you refer to evidence presented to us in paragraph 222, which you say suggested that this was a one-off instance. What was the evidence that had been presented to you by the BBA?
Well, the evidence would have been the responses from the BBA to the inquiries which were raised with them by Mr. Martin.
Right, so you mean the explanation given to Mr. Martin by the BBA that this was an unfortunate and rare oversight,
yes,
down to human error,
yes,
etc. So just that.
I mean, I had thought, though I may be recollecting, that there was other correspondence with the BBA.
You are right, and you are right, and I should show you that BBA 50178, page 2, a little earlier in the month, 16th of July 2014. As you can see, it's a longish email. It predates the one I showed you before. And in the second paragraph, he says, the reference to paragraph 12.7 seems to have been an unfortunate and rare oversight that would not escape the internal checks and measures that BBA currently operate. A review of other certificates has confirmed that this has been not reproduced elsewhere. Now, my question is that the evidence you're referring to?
That's the evidence to actually, well, the combination of those two emails,
right.
yes.
Well, it's not evidence there, was it? It's just the BBA's explanation.
Well, it's yes.
Right. Was it sufficient for you for there just to be an explanation rather than something a little bit more empirical?
Well, the BBA obviously is a reputable organisation with a very important role, and I would expect that if the BBA is approached by the department on a matter like this, that the BBA would provide an absolutely accurate and clear explanation of what happened and a response to the questions, and that would be, and therefore there would have been no reason for me, or I think Mr. Martin, or Mr. Harrell, or indeed the others who are copied into this email, Mr. Babington, Mr. Price, who worked in the team, to doubt what the BBA were telling us. Now, as I said in my witness statement, my view, having read this, and I did discuss this with Mr. Martin and Mr. Harrell, I do recall discussing this with him at the time, the collective view we had was to accept the assurance we received, and I took this as an assurance because, the reference to that this was a matter which Mr. Alban had spoken to the chief executive of the BBA about. I accepted the assurance that they had taken they had described the situation correctly, and they had taken appropriate action. As I said in my witness statement, the only avenue open to the department, because the BBA is an independent body, independent from the department, would be to go through through UCAS as the accreditation body. Viz a complaint, viz raising an issue with UCAS. But I, on the basis of what we were told, did not see or did not appreciate and did not think that there was a systemic issue here which would warrant UCAS investigation as opposed to a one-off problem, a one-off case, and that was the impression which I derived from the responses from the BBA.
Right. Now, Mr. Ledsome, Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at the time. It's now 4:30.
Yes.
It probably won't come as a surprise to you, or perhaps to Mr. Ledsome, that I have not finished, and I'm afraid not nearly finished. I'm going to ask you to rise now. The arrangements that we've made, subject to you and subject to the witness, are for us to interpose the next witness, Mr. Richard Harrell, to start at 10 o'clock on Monday morning. And I'm told that he will take until Tuesday evening. That's the estimate. And then to have Mr. Ledsome come back, if he would be so good as to do so, to finish his evidence on Wednesday. That will obviously have a knock-on effect on the rest of the timetable, but primarily I'm keen to learn from Mr. Ledsome and from you, Mr. Chairman, whether that proposal is acceptable.
Yes, all right. Well, now, Mr. Ledsome, I think we'd all hoped that we might finish your evidence today, but it obviously hasn't been possible, and I'm sorry for that. I'm afraid it's not possible for you to continue on Monday morning for practical reasons, which I won't trouble you with. The suggestion is that you should come back and resume your evidence on Wednesday. Now, would that be possible for you?
Well, of course, I will fit in with the best arrangements that are most suitable for the inquiry.
Well, that's very good of you. So we'll say then, shall we, that we'll break your evidence at this point and resume on Wednesday at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. Yes.
Right, Mr.
Yes, and just say that
Yes.
Mr. Ledsome is clear. At current strike rates, I would anticipate that we will be done, subject to finding some cuts by lunchtime, but that is not a
Right, well,
guarantee.
I was going to ask you that because I'm sure that Mr. Ledsome would like to know
Yes.
how much time we're going to require with him. Well, it sounds to me, Mr. Ledsome, as though there's a chance, but I wouldn't put it higher than that you will be free by lunchtime on Wednesday. But I think it would be wise, if you can, to keep the whole day free, just in case.
I will keep the whole day clear. I think that would be prudent, and I expected as much. And clearly, it's important that
Yes.
you take. I wish to give my evidence, so I will fit in.
Yes.
With my. I mean, the only comment I would make, obviously, this will be my match on Wednesday, that if there's any risk of a further runoff, then obviously into Thursday, for example, or problems in relation to Mr. Harrell's evidence that means that he run over, then clearly.
Well, we'll keep you as fully
keep me as
informed
fully
as we
informed as
can if
possible,
there are any
yes.
changes to
Of
the
course, yes.
Expected timetable. Now, the only other thing to say is that I've said to you every time you've left the room, please don't talk to anyone
course.
about your evidence. It's going to be difficult because you're going to have the weekend coming up and some additional days. But
Yes.
I think I must ask you, please, not to discuss your evidence
course.
or anything relating to it with anyone while you are, as it were, in limbo.
I absolutely appreciate
And
that.
I'd be grateful if you would
course.
observe that carefully. All right. Well, then, on that basis, we'll stop now, and we'll look forward to seeing you again on Wednesday of next week
Of course.
at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
All right? Thank you very much indeed. Then. Would you go to the usher then, please? Well, right, Mr. Millett. So we will expect to see a different witness on Monday morning.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It'll be Richard Harrell, who will be examined by Miss Grange, Queen's Counsel.
Right, thank you. And no doubt we shall be seeing Mr. Ledsome on Wednesday next week, and no doubt you'll be back in the driving seat.
Yes, thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Well, we break at that point. We'll resume at 10 o'clock on Monday morning, then, please. Thank you.